Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about relationships and money, and it's one that's important. It's a conversation that all of us have had or have tried to have or know we need to have, and it's kind of one that's a little scary. But what if you could just get some best practices and tactics to soften some of those conversations, increase the ROI, and decrease the pain? That's the point of this conversation today. We invited Jillian Johnsrud, host of Everyday Courage, and from JillianJohnsrud.com. She has a community where she has really dived into this topic with a lot of intensity, a lot of focus for the last really 2 years, prioritize this. And through the process of helping her own group grow, as well as coaching, I mean, literally thousands of hours on these topics, there are clearly some best practices here, and I can't wait to dive into this. We're taking your questions and answering them on this show. Welcome to the Ultimate Crowdsourced Personal Finance Show. This is Choose FI.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
Everyone. So with that, we're going to be kicking this off, relationships and money. I tell you, this is probably a weak spot for me. You know, I get the spreadsheets, I get the graphs, but actually being able to communicate effectively, not with necessarily with you guys. I feel like I'm doing a pretty decent job there, but with my loved ones, you know, with relatives, so with my wife, with other individuals. This is a room that I really could use some growth. So I'm really excited about this. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I am doing quite well. Yeah, this should be a lot of fun. Like you said, this is so critically important. And a lot of us just don't have the conversations because we don't know where to start. And I think that's where Jillian comes in. And she, like you said, thousands of hours. She is just an expert in this. And she's just a wonderful human being. She's so empathetic. She understands how important communication is. And yeah, this should be a lot of fun. So Jillian, with that, welcome back to Choose FI.
Man, thank you guys for having me. I am excited about this conversation.
Well, the conversation is relationships and money. And if you could provide some insight from the last 2 years, because I know you've put a focus on this, why is this such a focus for you?
Money is, I would say it's in the top 3 things that people really struggle to communicate with. It might be a close second to sex. Sex is super hard to talk about, and then money is right below it. The third might be our reasons and motivations for work. And so in the FI community, we're dealing with these reasons and motivations for work and money. And it's tough. Like I even see it with coaching clients. It's funny. When I'm one-on-one with a client, they tend to be very open, very comfortable. But whenever I coach couples, man, it's a lot of sideways glances. Like they think about saying something, they look at their partner. They think about saying something, they look at their partner. In the context of relationships, it's just very vulnerable.
Jillian, why do you think that is, right? Like this is someone you've chosen to spend your life with, you know, and it's so hard to talk about money. Where does that come from?
I think most of us didn't see that modeled growing up. You know, money and sex are things that happen behind closed doors. We didn't see our parents figure out how to communicate about that. And for a lot of families, it was very taboo. It was considered very impolite. And that's so deeply ingrained. Actually, for the cover of my workbook, I put a little vote on Instagram. I had 4 pictures that the designer mocked up. And I said, okay, which ones of these 4 do you like? And one of them had a picture of me holding money. And a few people commented, I don't know why, but that just makes me really uncomfortable. It just feels kind of icky. Just the sight of looking at money makes us feel a little uncomfortable.
So uncomfortable conversations are something that all of us, I think, that resonates with us. And even as you're saying that, you know, you can be open with a stranger, but it's more difficult to be open with someone that's in your inner circle that already knows so much other stuff about you. And it's very easy to feel like you're being pushed into a corner and to get cagey and defensive and things spiral out of control from there. So what we did is let's explore that a little further. And instead of, setting up the questions ourselves and answering the questions that we pick, let's just put this out to the larger Choosify and Everyday Courage community and see what it is that they're struggling with and that they would like this conversation to highlight. And so inside of our Fi Weekly, so for our subscribers, Brad sends out a once a week personalized newsletter. And in this, yes, we're going to have this conversation coming up. Would you like to submit a voicemail and we'll talk about it on the show? And what's coming up next is a direct result of those voicemails that we received.
The first question is from Jonesy, and it's a great question about kind of in a new relationship, how to keep lines of communication about money open, how to get on the same page.
Hi, Jillian, Brad, and Jonathan. My name is Jonesy, and I have a question about keeping lines of communication open with my significant other. We have just moved into an apartment together and are definitely in different stages of our FI journey. She is still a full-time student going for physical therapy, and I'm working full time and just beginning to build my portfolio and go all crazy with savings rates and all that. And we find it's sometimes difficult to stay on the same page about finances, as you might imagine. She doesn't really want to hear about how much money I saved last month when she's struggling to just make ends meet and cash flow her school. So I'm just looking for some tips and ways that we can stay on the same page about money, yet be in two very different spots financially. We haven't joined our finances together or anything like that, but we're starting to take those baby steps. Anyway, thanks for all three of you do. Love both the podcasts, and we'll keep listening.
All right. So Jillian, we have two individuals at two different kind of financial stages at life. And with the crosstalk, there's some friction there. They're having trouble pulling alongside each other and working towards a common goal. So where do we start with this?
So one of the great tricks, and this is true for any relationship, but especially if you're having a hard time just talking about money, finding common ground to discuss money is starting at this more foundational level of learning to tell your kind of money stories together. And it can be very simple prompts of stories from your childhood or growing up, or stories you remember, how you remember how your parents spent money, anything that you wish they wouldn't have spent money on. What would you really wish they would have spent money on? Like, what's your first money memory? Because we intuitively know these stories. We all know our childhood stories, and it allows two people to comfortably tell a story, but more importantly, to feel really seen and heard. Because talking about money in the present context can be contentious. Like, it could lead to a fight, but you're never going to fight someone about their story. You're never going to fight someone of yeah, there was this time when we were living paycheck to paycheck and I was really nervous. My mom wouldn't be able to make rent. No one's going to argue with you about that. So it gives you a good opportunity to just start learning about each other financially, but also to be able to talk about money without the fact that you guys are in different places now. We all started in the same place. We all started as kids trying to figure out who earns a lot of money. Why do they earn a lot of money? Will I earn a lot of money when I grow up? Who invests money? These kinds of questions that we started figuring out as kids.
How does Jonesy initiate this without it feeling like a tactic at this point? Because probably this frustration is because he's tried to have these financial conversations several times.
Mm-hmm.
And now literally just mentioning money, it's a psychological barrier of proceeding forward. And so the counterparty can smell the trap, it's been hyped up. So how do we de-risk these conversations and allow this to be something that feels natural and is disarming and is not a trap?
I think that's the first part. One, don't make it a trap. Be genuinely curious about your partner. Be curious about their life and their experience and what made them the way they are and how that shaped them into who they are. We oftentimes will talk about all these other things, especially when people are thinking about having kids together. We talk a lot about the parenting that we experienced, the parenting that we witnessed, how we want to do things the same or how we want to do things differently or how we perceived situations. Start to do the same about money and just say, man, I know we've been fighting a lot about this. I know we aren't really on the same page. How about we try something different? How about I would love to hear about Maybe the first time that you started earning money, what did you do with that money? Did you save it? Did you spend it? Like, what did that mean to finally earn your money yourself? And just take 2 or 3 questions and let them open up. Don't interrupt. Let them be heard. Let them feel seen. And if it's been contentious, you don't have to transition into, and now it's budget time. Um, but for couples that are there, I usually recommend pick 1 or 2 questions just to like open up conversation, put people in a more relaxed state, help people feel seen and heard. And then you can talk about your budget or your debt payoff strategy. But it's a good icebreaker.
Yeah, Jillian, I love this because for so many people, and I'm just pulling numbers out of my head here, but like probably 95 to 99% of conversations surrounding money are about something negative, right? For
Mhm.
most of us, it's something contentious. It's, oh, you spend too much. Oh, it's, we have stress surrounding this. How are we going to pay that bill, right? Like that's the sad reality of life. So money, unfortunately, you have your defenses up whenever it comes to that. And I'm looking at your solution of having this tell your money story together as like, it's kind of like that lead domino for,
Mhm.
hey, how can we take a little action? Like you said, I want to stress this. Make it 1 or 2 questions. This is
Mhm.
not going to be, hey, let's carve out 4 hours on a Saturday and just talk about money all day. Like that's not, in my opinion, the right step of, hey, we've never talked about money, or the only time we've talked about money, it's been stressful, to, hey,
Yeah.
let's sit down and bare our souls for 4 hours. Like, let's do something positive. Let's just have this little conversation. And then, it's like how we're always talking at Choose a Vibe about small actions that compound on each other. Like, again, that lead domino concept of, hey, it's this one thing that we can do that, wow, we're walking away with really positive feelings. We feel closer together,
Mhm.
right? Because we know a little bit more about each other. We know maybe why you think that way or you react that way when it comes time to talk about money, or if your paycheck and that bill is a little bit extra than you thought it would be, like why you might freak out. I'm just, again,
Yeah.
just making things up, but these are real world situations that people could face.
Yeah. Me and Adam, my husband, we did not communicate well about money when we first got married. I would say the first 3 years was very contentious because we both had very different money stories. And we didn't know how to express that. We didn't know how to explain why we were reacting the way we were reacting, why we felt the way we felt about situations. We had one incident. My new season of the podcast comes out March 1st, and we kind of dive into this, but we were probably 2 years into marriage. We'd paid off most of our debt. We were starting to save, like we were in a good place. Adam asked me, hey, can I get the windows tinted on our Honda Civic? And I was like, sure, whatever. Not having any idea what the cost of this
I
is.
mean,
I
if
don't know.
you
I
get
probably
the
thought it was
cheap
like
one,
20
then
bucks.
it bubbles. You can't do the cheap tint. Like if you're gonna do it, just promise me you'll do it right, Adam. That's
And he had lots of windows tinted because he grew up in Vegas, like that was his thing. I had never in my life tinted a window. And he had it done, and the bill came back, and it was $240. And in his words, I lost my mind. And I basically didn't talk to him for 3 days, like, which is so embarrassing to me now. But I had such a big reaction, and I just couldn't explain to him why. At the core, it terrified me. It wasn't even that I was angry. The kind of explosion of anger was just me being really scared. But I had never told him all of the stories that if he would have known, it would have made perfect sense why I was scared in that moment. And we could have at least understood each other. But instead of him knowing that I was scared, he thought I was being very controlling and I was trying to control him. So one miscommunication led to another. And such was the first couple years of our marriage.
I think I'm looking at your workbook right now and I got a chance to preview it. And I think it does an amazing job providing targeted, guided questions for a lot of the stuff that we're actually talking now and breaking down some of these scary, big things that we want to accomplish into bite-sized, non-intimidating questions that are pretty easy to have, especially, if you're just collaborating on something. But I noticed in the way that you structured the workbook, and I think it's tied to what we're talking about now, you pretty early on in the book, when you're talking about what your money story is, you actually go back to find out what is your parents' money story, or rather, a better way of phrasing that is, what is your perception of your parents' money story? And there's a bunch of questions here. And I'm curious, is that, when you think about this exact scenario, with you and Adam, and you're like, well, if he had just known this and this, he would have known, he would completely, is it in some way tied to your perception of your parents' money story? And is that why this gets such an early focus in the book?
Yep. So growing up as children, and this is true in basically every area of our life, we see our parents' patterns, their habits, their mindsets, and we either conform to it and copy it or we rebel against it. And neither of these are necessarily conscious choices. That's just how we're wired. We conform or we rebel. And so we kind of take on this generational attitudes and mindsets. And there's even a sense of sometimes generational trauma. And a great example of that is my great grandmother, who I lived with a little bit when I was a kid. When she was maybe 5 or 6, the youngest child in her family, her youngest brother, drowned in some standing water. And this is like 1930. And so she watched her dad go into the wood shop and made his coffin. She watched her mom and her older sisters prepare his body. And it was so traumatic for the family that for her entire life, she was terrified of children and water. Like it just radiated from her. And because I grew up with her and we had, in the spring, there was standing water on her property, I felt that. And I am terrified of children and water. I absorbed all of her fear and anxiety, even though she never actually told me that story. I never heard it from her. I just felt it. And that can be true in our financial stories as well. Growing up, I had one family member that so I grew up in Montana. So you have to understand, Montana is very different than East Coast. 100 years ago in Montana, no electricity, no running water, little farm sheds, 40-degree winters. It's very survival. Everything is scarcity. Everything is if we screw this up, we might die. And so you get this fear of waste, this fear of if I make a mistake, we might die. It has enormous consequences that can't easily be fixed. And I had grandparents that definitely were raised in that, one mistake, and it could have a horrible consequence. And so for me, I was raised in that fear of if one thing goes wrong, one purchase that comes in too high, $220 window tinting, and we're in danger, despite the fact that we weren't in danger. But that was my initial gut reaction fear.
And Jillian, it's so fascinating that Adam, it sounds like his own maybe money story or life story was built into his response of you're trying to be controlling, right? That was my initial takeaway.
Very much. And that was very much his family dynamic of there was a power play over money, who got to spend money, who was not allowed to spend money at home. All of those stories get internalized. And he had seen that. And instead of conforming to that and saying, yeah, I want my family to follow that pattern, he wanted to rebel against that and say, you know what, in my family, we're going to do this different. One person doesn't get to make all the financial decisions.
It's funny how we always think we're the reasonable one, right? We're the level-headed one. We're the one that has a proper grasp of the scenario. That we're not bringing any bias or money story into this. It's just the other person.
Yeah. And so it's important to see with our parents and our grandparents and just kind of our culture, what did we inherit? What was the assumption? What was that normal that is just the way it is, baseline? And then to ask, is that serving me well for where I want to go next? I interviewed for the season of the podcast, The Humble Penny. Him and his wife are over in the UK, first generation immigrants from Africa. Both of their families, came over when they were young. And generationally, it wasn't things in their family or in their surrounding communities where you saved for retirement. You never saved for old age. It was very community driven. The community takes care of itself at every stage. The family takes care of itself at every stage. So this idea of if we have extra, we invest it for the future, it didn't exist, but not because it was bad. It was because his grandparents never needed that. It wasn't something that was necessary for them. But in England, 2010, it's actually super important to save for retirement. So sometimes what helped our grandparents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, that scarcity mindset probably got all of the family through healthy and safe to the next generation. It was helpful for them, but is it helpful for me right now to get to my goals? And that's the part that we have to be thoughtful of. It's okay that we inherited this, but do we want to take it forward?
Yeah, and it's so interesting when you're talking about scarcity and the Montana mindset. When you were saying that, and what you just mentioned, that reminds me of just the inherent bias of our brains to keep us safe, right?
Yeah.
our brains are still worried about tigers jumping out from behind bushes, but that doesn't exactly happen in 2021 now. But our brains are always looking for ways to keep us safe. And sometimes that leads to anxiety. Sometimes that leads to, staying in our heads too much and just worrying about things that just simply aren't going to come to pass. So, as you were saying that, I'm thinking like, okay, yes, this has been our past, but let's look at the future. And are these stories, are they serving us anymore? And I think that's just a really critical question to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
So, Jillian, I did want to go back real quick to Jonesy's specific question, and I think you gave an amazing answer for how to get started, and I think that will be the help that leads to everything else going well. But just for my own edification, like they're in an interesting situation, right, where they are not married, they moved in together, but they're in very different spots. It sounds like Jonesy has found FI, the savings rate, all this stuff, and his girlfriend is in debt, is in school, is going to have a nice income when she becomes, it sounds like, a physical therapist, but is not in that point. Like, what do they do in the short term? I mean, sure, communication is going to help everything. I think that probably will be the answer. But like, does anything else jump to mind?
I think it's okay to skip the stuff in the middle for now. So start with the communication and then start with the outcomes. Like, what do we want this next year to look like? You don't have to get into the nitty gritty about savings rates and specific budget items, but find like one common goal to work towards. Like, do you guys want to take a trip once pandemic is over? And maybe just talk about that one goal. It doesn't have to be full disclosure. We're going to work through every single area. If during this time you guys just really learn to talk about money and you understand each other financially and you work together on one financial goal, by the time that you're kind of on the same page, all that middle stuff of budgeting and percentages is going to be so much easier.
And I can definitely relate to her aspect of it as well. I remember when I was in pharmacy school and I was taking out, $20, $30, $40,000 a year for school. It's really hard to get super excited about, the next step on the other side of this when you're, in your second year of a 4-year program or a 3-year program, I think, for PA. You still know you're going to have to take out another $40K, and that's just going to be for, and then there's probably going to be living costs on top of that. And your basic financial goals at that point, because you're kind of locked into the path you're on, is just like, how can I borrow maybe less? It's kind of like, it's a gauntlet and you got to get through it. And, once you get to the other side, you can start doing some forecasting on like, what is your plan going to be on the other side? Like, am I going to try to pay this off early? Am I going to do some sort of income-based repayment program with some sort of strategy in mind? You can start getting a little bit excited, but it is hard, especially in those early couple years before you get to that last year of your doctorate degree or last year of school. It is hard to figure out, practically this theoretical income that you've been working for close to a decade now. What is that going to mean and how is that going to change your life? Because literally for the last decade, you've just been living on debt. How do I make the debt less? That's basically the game. So I can certainly sympathize with that. And I like your idea about, all right, if we can't solve the middle or optimize every little aspect of the middle, let's look at the endpoints. Look at our overall communication and let's look at what we want to build together on the other side, because we are going to get there. We're going to get there.
Hey everyone, we're going to be right back to hear Jonathan, Brad, and Jillian take another voicemail. But first, we're going to take a quick ad break.
Jillian, who's next?
We have got Sam, and this is a really fascinating question about, people that are together, but one's on the FI path and the other says, I don't think it's for me. Like, can this work?
You hear the pillars of FI, you hear the why of FI, you're super excited, you take it in, you introduce it, and like, no, we're not doing that. What do you mean, no, we're not doing that? All right, let's see what happens.
Hi, this is in response to your questions regarding relationships and money. I'm 31 years old. I've been pursuing FIRE for about 3 years now, and I just got married in October. But my husband is not on the same FIRE plan as me. It's not terrible. He doesn't have any debt, and he does save some for retirement. But I am somewhere around 50+% savings rate, and he is nowhere near that. So my question is this a problem? We haven't combined our finances, and he is perfectly fine not retiring early like I plan to. My goal right now is to retire sometime in my mid to late 40s. So I just wonder, is there any major issue if we continue to keep our finances separately for the most part, and I pursue my FIRE goal while he plans to work until he's about 60.
All right, Jillian, now this is an interesting one. And I think people have navigated this both ways. I've seen some people talk about how they keep their finances separate. In fact, Brad, I'll have to come back to you on this. I believe, at least at one point, I'm pretty certain that the mad scientist was, in fact, keeping his finances separate from his wife. So there is not one prescriptive answer, but I do think clearly this is causing some anxiety for Samantha. And I think there probably are some best practices here for getting on the same page. So, Jillian, I'll give this over to you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so when we started, the three hardest things to communicate about sex, money, and work, I would spend some time figuring out that work piece. And it sounds like maybe there's some more communication that can happen about how we feel about work, about the role of work, how our identity is tied to work, all the non-financial things that work brings to us, because it's very feasible for one person to retire and one person to stay working. And separate finances, very feasible. On the surface, those aren't issues. My only concern would be, do you guys really understand each other's stories and ideas and mindsets around this? And are you really on the same page? The problem is, when the time comes, if you don't really understand, then it's kind of too late to fix it. It could create a rift. At that point, it's better to have the conversations now to where you feel really confident that he really wants to keep working, that he's okay with you taking time off and not working, that you guys are okay with different amounts of assets, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, you said something in there. On the surface, it could work.
Yeah.
That's a very diplomatic way of saying, like, at least as I'm hearing it, like, this is something, there's something deeper underlying this that you really need. Again, going back to that communication.
Yeah.
I mean, this sounds to me, and I am the farthest thing from an expert, this sounds to me like this is going to blow up at some point. It's just a matter of when potentially, like, what happens if we just don't ever have a conversation about this, right? Like, let's use under the guise of, okay, we're different. We're never going to talk about it. When I'm 45, I'm just going to up and retire. Like, I can't imagine that going over, exceedingly well without conversation, without any kind of forewarning. So again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but that communication is just so critical. But let's talk about that. On the surface, it could work, ... Jillian, take it away. Like that's what I'd love to hear you talk more about.
I think you just have to sort out all of those things that are below the surface and make sure that as individuals, you figured it out. And as a couple, you've been able to share it together, because honestly, a lot of people don't realize all of the way their identity is tied to their work and all the weird hangups we have about money. I recently shared on Twitter that my assets these last few years have out-earned any yearly income we've ever had. And it weirds me out. Like, it's amazing. People should start investing early, but it honestly weirds us out. And our assets have been earning significant amount for like a decade, and I'm still weirded out by it. But frequently, I would say at least 6 or 8 times a year, because I have such a strong correlation of you work really hard for every single dollar and you strive and you put effort in for every dollar. And the fact that my assets so effortlessly just keep producing money, it just the space-time continuum is broken in my brain because of this. But that could be a huge issue for her spouse. If he sees her assets outpacing, her assets are earning more than he's earning, is he going to be comfortable with that? Or sometimes people don't like to retire because they have this discomfort with assets making money. I want to make money. I want to be the productive one. I want to be the provider, not this money. It feels like a video game cheat code. And it takes a while to kind of, especially if you grew up where work equals money, not money just makes its own money, craziness. It takes a while to unravel that.
Jillian, I conceptually understand the concept of keeping finances separate. Obviously, I understand the mechanics of it, all that stuff, but I'm someone who likes to take things to its logical progression, just to kind of expose, does this make sense? Aside from this is just kind of how I think. And to me, the extreme logical progression of this is, okay, she's saving 50+%. She's wealthy on her own in her 40s. Let's just assume that everything's great theoretically. They split all their expenses. That's their combined, the one aspect of combined finances as I would imagine this works, right? But he decides to save zero. Or let's say he has some debt. Like, what happens in that logical progression when she is rich and he is literally poor, but they are married? That is where this construct of keeping finances separate breaks down for me. And I know I'm just being old fashioned in some sense, but help me out here. Help me understand how this could work in a situation like that.
So there again, on the surface, it could work if you figured out all the things beneath. If he is truly comfortable with that situation, if she's comfortable with that situation, if there's not any power dynamic or kind of manipulation happening and the relationship's really healthy, it could work. But there's a lot of conversations to kind of double check
And there's
all
a lot
those
of
what
ifs. Did you notice there were a lot of ifs there? If this, if this. The other thing that came to mind, and I'll give it back to you in just a second here, was this has also been something that potentially has been advocated by Gene Chatsky, the yours, mine, and ours. I think the difference is one person has a very clear goal and the other person doesn't. And those goals go in two different places. So as opposed to yours, mine, and ours, which is a way to get from one week to the next and be able to have more control over your day-to-day money, the difference here is we're really talking about where are we going to be in 10 years? And one person is going to have a lot of options because it's by design. They made the choice to give themselves the option 10 years from now. The other person could make the similar choice, but they're basically stating they don't really want to consider that as something that they're serious about, which means they probably won't. So to Brad's point, it ends up exactly where Brad said, but I wanted to point out the mindset was actually 10 years earlier and they're going in two different directions. And that's the part, like you said, on the surface it works, but that's the part where the stress is going to bubble to the surface, as opposed to two individuals managing day-to-day finances separately, yours, mine, and ours, so they don't need to get permission to spend $200 on a tent or whatever. I get that. Totally makes sense. But one person saying, I want to save and this is my pot over here, so I have massive options. And the other person is, well, I want the right to spend everything I make. Now let's see where we are in 10 years. Well, 10 years is going to be rocky because one person wants to they want to flex their freedom. They've bought the ultimate luxury. The other person didn't.
Yeah. And I think that if I could pick one conversation starter, it would be kind of unraveling that idea that he probably has around work. A lot of people like working. My husband is one of them. He would have been very happy working his entire career. The reality is once our kids are older, he might go back to work. He finds a lot of purpose and joy and community in kind of that work construct. So he never would have wanted early retirement. He never on his own would have set a FI path. But life changes, situations change. We had 5 little kids, and having that option was amazing. Having that option was amazing because we could say, yeah, we do need a little break. We need a pause, and we could make that choice together. So I think for them deciding what would be some things we might want to do in 10 or 15 years. Could we make it work with your job? If you got closer to FI, could you work part-time? Could you have more flexibility? Could we do these things together? And it's okay if her husband wants to keep working. But having more options along with her options, kind of option equality, might make it easier even if he keeps working.
All right, well, we have one more voicemail that we're going to be playing today from Titan, and we are going to pick up this conversation and continue it on a future Friday roundup. So stay tuned from that if you're getting value from the series. I also just wanted to add, and I'll remind you at the end, we're talking with Jillian Johnsrud, the host of the Everyday Courage podcast, and she has put together these guided questions and these conversations into a workbook plus a digital course if you want the companion to have someone help you go through these and workshop this with your significant other, partner, spouse. You can see how this will massively move the needle. And for more information on that, Jillian, they can just go to jillianjohnsrud.com/one, ONE1. Is that correct?
Yep.
Awesome.
And for the Choose FI audience, in the month of March, I'm doing a $30 discount. So if you just enter the discount code
Choose FI 30, as in 30.
Yeah, we can get you hooked up with that.
All right, let's go ahead and play this voicemail that we got from Titan.
Hey, Choose FI, big fan of the show. I was wondering how to impress the idea upon my significant other that the monthly graph, that chart that we do where we add it all up, is not only really, really important, but it's also really exciting and fun. And that graph is your finish line, and you can see, how many days, months, years away financial independence is, and how to sort of, start caring about that graph other than it being like a lifeless computer program that you plug numbers into. Anyway, super big fan of the show. You guys are really awesome, and you're just doing so much for the community. Thank you.
Thanks, Titan. I love your graph already. So you get full credit for me. I'm like, yes, let's see it, man. Let's count the days, the weeks, the months. Like I'm digging it. So it sounds like you're not getting the same response from your significant other, and I can relate to that. Not everybody's impressed by my charts either.
This question was so funny for me because I think this is so many people's story, and it's for sure me and my husband. Like, even in my courses, I always say, like, in a couple, there is a worksheet filler outer and there's a let's talk about it person. You rarely have two worksheet filler outers in a couple. I don't know why we get paired. The worksheet filler outers, the graph lovers get paired about the can we just talk about it people? But somehow we find each other. So my encouragement to Titan, she probably won't ever be excited about this graph, honey. Like, I'm sorry. It's so sweet that you want to share your excitement. Like I said, my husband, zero interest. He is very polite and he knows my Excel sheet means a lot to me. So he's very polite and he tries to pay attention. But deep down, I know he has zero interest in this, despite the fact that this reflects this amazing life we've created, despite the fact that it reflects our financial independence and our travel and all of these really cool things. The numbers do nothing for him. And that's okay. Like, not everyone's going to be excited about numbers and charts and graphs. So instead, I would pull the excitement back from the numbers and charts and make it about the life that you guys are creating. Make it about the goals that you have and the dreams that you have and the lifestyle that you want to live. And, whether you guys have time to, if you're going to have kids, take time off with the kids or to travel or to buy a vacation home or to work part-time or whatever is actually exciting for her. Make 90% of your conversation about that. And then you can slip this little chart in and say, see, the numbers are getting closer, getting us closer to that dream. But that dream has to be the focus.
Yeah, Jillian, I love that. Right. I mean, clearly the numbers, the spreadsheet, the graph, it's not gonna mean the same thing to everybody. But find what part of the story is meaningful, right? That graph tells a story. And it tells a story of our options, of our freedom, of that time when we're gonna take that trip or we're gonna do whatever together, right? Like there's so many aspects in that story that are just embedded in that graph. And everybody might not see it right away, but it's your duty to make this something that's exciting for both of you in the relationship. And I think that can be a lot of fun, right? It's like finding what lights your significant other up about this story of financial independence. I think that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, that was how me and Adam got on the same page. Like, we sat down and we started life planning. We started dreaming. We started setting goals. Like, we started imagining how life could be different. And then I would go behind the scenes and run the numbers. And I would say, okay, here's what we need to do financially to get there. But planning, dreaming was 90%. Me saying, hey, I ran the numbers. Here's what we have to do this week or this month or this year was like a 10-minute conversation. And he would very politely listen for 10 minutes. I'm sure forget all of it. For being married to me, he has like a hilarious ignorance about all things financial. My financial friends find it so funny to be like, what's the fair percent rule? And just hear the craziest answers. What's an index fund? And it's just all that to say, like, one person doesn't have to be super geeky about this to get where you need to go.
I think there's also a trust component that can be built on this. Like, the chart is important for you. It's important for me. It keeps me locked in. When my wife and I got married, we had a net worth of, over $168,000 in student loan debt. And guess who brought the debt into the marriage? Looking at him. This was me. And while she may not have loved my explanation of all the charts and the graphs, I had my whiteboard up in the office that I would use as a visualizer to mark every 2 weeks, where I would send in this massive paycheck to start whittling away at that debt. And she sure as heck loved that debt disappearing over the 4 years and the freedom that afforded us on the other side. And, we've actually had conversations recently about how can we, have more fun with kind of our goal planning, on a monthly basis. And so these conversations do come in over time. And what's cool is, just because Jillian's husband doesn't know what the 4% rule is and may never know what the 4% rule, he's still benefiting from the charts that Jillian has put a lot of energy into creating. And he trusts, that process at this point. So there's a lot, the communication doesn't need to, this I think is the key point. Us going through this process, the end result does not have to be our significant other loving our charts and graphs. That's not the conversion that we're looking for. What we're looking for here is trust that we're building an awesome life together and we're moving forward in the same direction, and that is the key to this entire thing. It's not to turn them into another human being. They're going to be who they are. But if we can uncover a little bit about their money story, a little bit of our money story, and figure out how we can do a better job communicating our goals together, we're going to be able to build a better life. And that's what this episode was about. So I hope that you will use this episode as a starting place, not the ending place. It's the, it's really the start of your next chapter. And I think the next logical place, if this is what you need in your life, is to go check out the resource that Jillian has put together, especially if this is a pain point for you. And to do that, go to JillianJohnsrud.com/one, ONE1. And she did put a special offer in this month for our listeners. Just use the coupon code ChooseFI30. ChooseFI30. Jillian, final thoughts to you on this topic. And I know we have a couple more of these really important conversations, and we'll have that on an upcoming episode. But final thoughts for you on today's conversation?
Yeah, I think this last question is a good tie-in to the course, because the course is called 1 Hour Millionaire. And the premise is it should only take you about 1 hour a month to set your trajectory to $1 million net worth. So by the end, it's a 21-day course. By the end, you'll have this 1 hour plan that you can work together. And I even created, for those couples that one's super into it and one's not into it at all, I created a 15-minute financial update and then just conversation questions so that you can play CFO of your family behind the scenes and figure out all the numbers. And then you have something you can share in just 15 minutes with your spouse or your partner. And then you guys can talk about other things, because having that opportunity to review and talk about your finances in a positive, healthy way is what will help set this trajectory. But for a lot of people, it's hard to structure that conversation. It's hard to get on the same page. So that's kind of the goal behind this course, is to, in the course of 21 days, develop that 1 hour plan.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Very important conversation, relationships and money. And I think what's so fun about this is truly the crowdsourcing aspect. So Jillian, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Man, thank you guys so much for having me. This is awesome.
All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
If this episode was helpful to you, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your friends about us. We can be found on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. While you're there, don't forget to check out our other shows like Everyday Courage with Jillian Johnsrud and Rebel Entrepreneur with Alan Dalnigan. If you would like a free bite-sized course to jumpstart your financial independence, check out Choosify.com/challenge. Choosify is produced by Andrew Mendonza and Zachary Tan and is a production of Choosify Media Incorporated. Choosify.com is managed by Annie Sheely with William McVeigh, MK Williams, Melissa Lagerquist, Liz Kessler, Stephen Heptig, Kelly Black, and Jennifer Ma. And Ed T is our CEO. Thanks for listening.